It gives me great pleasure to have Mihir here joining us. In fact, we've been talking about this masterclass for almost 2 years now. I think that Mihir is really interesting because he's like a new generation of non-fiction writer that's bridging the kind of vernacular English divide. So there's an ease with the way you write, and Vidhi and I were just talking about this. But then the way in which you use, Hindi comes in. It's a very different way in which you inhabit travel writing, which is very new. So one can think about, Mihir's genealogy of travel writing within the Western canon. But there's also an interesting, and I wanted to ask you this maybe later on, the great travel writers say in Hindi, like Sansvitayan, who writes Humakkad Shastra. We'll get to that. And he's writing this travel narrative, place writing, not from metropolitan center, but like regional and, small town India, which also makes him interesting. So Tales of Hadaribagh is the center of our discussion. The book is circulating. I had monopolized the only copy the library had. So there was some disgruntled complaints about that. But I've circulated the chapters that you had talked about that you wanted people to read. So Mihir is a literature person, which is why he's, interesting to have join us. And there's a point in your book where you say, as I was trained in literature, I knew the words context, critique, and problematic. I did not know the words topography, terrain, undulation. And I think that's a problem that some of our students have too. So I'm looking forward to this process and how you learned and to move so effortlessly in your writing between history, geology, topography and personal memoir, and thoughts on that process for our students who are also now beginning their writing. Thank you, Mihir. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to Krea. And even though this is an online mode, but I'm well versed with this mode now after 3 years of pandemic. So I won't take much time. I'll just quickly get on the lecture. Okay. And some of you, I think most of you already have had a long day attending multiple classes. So just relax and just listen. Okay. So I'm just going to talk and we'll do some exercises later. Just listen. Okay. Now, when it comes to place writing, nature is never absent. And when it comes to nature writing, place is never absent because neither of these two things exist in a vacuum. So a place cannot be an unnatural place and nature cannot be unmoored from a place. So both of them are very intricately linked. Now it depends that on which side do we focus our attention on. So think of it as a spectrum. If you focus attention on things that humans have built or humans themselves, or if you want to look at civilizational artifacts, then of course your place writing will be geared more towards the anthropocentric. And if you are rather interested in looking at how nature operates within these civilized spaces, trying to figure out, for example, in front of a skyscraper, there might be a tree and that relevance of that tree, that why that tree was left untouched or why that tree has not been mowed down, or what that tree does to the people who occupy that skyscraper. Or if you are living in a corporate office somewhere in Bangalore or Pune, or a highly, a highly modern building like our new campuses that are cropping up, and still from the window of your classroom or your office space, you look out, and if you see clouds moving, or if you see the indication of rain approaching, or that sun which has just come up. So it depends on our perspective that what we are looking at. And that selection and combination, that is a very individual thing. So no two person present in the classroom and me talking from this digital space, no two person can generate the same kind of space. You guys are sitting in a lecture theater. I thought that some of you might be sitting in your rooms, but that's okay. But we can begin our discussion from this very nice compact unit of the room itself. That what does the room signify? Uh, Presently, ideally, I should have been in Delhi, but due to some work that I had to do in Jharkhand, so I am talking to you from Hazaribagh, and I'll go back to Delhi after 7 days. So this room in Hazaribagh, I am very ashamed to show you the room behind. So it's all blurred, but this room is very personal to me, just like all our rooms are. Uh, and rooms are interesting because there are certain formula to which to how rooms are constructed. There has to be a window, there has to be a door, there have to be corners. Then there has to be a wardrobe or a cabinet. These are things that we are born into. These were already there before. So when I am born in a house, I already know that, or at least I have grown up looking at certain configurations of the room, right? And then when I go away, or when I turn 18, or at whatever age that we get our own separate rooms, we personalize those rooms according to our wishes, right? Now, the reason I am taking the room as an example is that when we look outside of the window of our room, sometimes if we are living in a very crowded area, then sometimes we look straight into someone else's house. But if we are not living in very crowded areas, then there are certain glimpses of the outside world that are available to us. So in many ways, the room, or at least that window, it frames the outside for us. So it allows certain sights to be seen. And as long as we are looking at outside through the framing of the window, nothing else matters. It is what I see in my immediate range. Sometimes I might see a branch of a tree. Sometimes I might see a bird. And sometimes I might hear certain things, some noise, some sound. Sometimes the air might feel damp outside if I put my hand out. And sometimes the air might feel very dry, right? But I am still sheltered, right? This sheltering which the room is giving to me, it is a very personal kind of sheltering, right? There is, of course, a philosophical debate about this shelter originating from Heidegger and all other theorists, but will not go there. My purpose is to just simplify that man tries to build uh, a shelter for himself, herself, in order to protect themselves from the adversities of nature, right? So that's how we create homes. We build our caves or houses, right? And yet, the adversities of nature, when they are toned down, when nature becomes personable, then we do enjoy it. So sometimes even after we have constructed our homes, we also take great pains to attach a garden. It's a private garden, but we want some kind of balance of the human world which we have created and the non-human world which we build outside. Sometimes if there is a space crunch, then those gardens occupy our balconies. Sometimes they go on to the terrace. Even inside the room, the nature is not absent. We still breathe, right? So air is natural. Even when you turn on the lights, that light, regardless of whether it is coming from the sun or whether it is coming from the bulb, as long as we are able to apprehend that light through our sight, it's still natural. That light has been sourced using natural energy or using some minerals or something like that, which in the end are all natural products. There is a tendency by which we somehow think that mining or extraction of natural resources uh, uh, kind of is a very man-made big enterprise. But before it became before it became industrialized, man has always used nature in order to survive. It has taken fish from the water. He has taken energy from the sun. He has taken coal from the earth. So throughout history, there is a kind of syncretism or a symbiosis between the human and nature, which we usually say is located outside of human in these times. The purpose is not to draw this binary, the human and the non-human, or human and the nature. The purpose is to try and investigate that how both humans and nature somehow come to exist together. Now, to give an example, and going back to the window of the room, sometimes you might see that a pigeon might come and rest on the windowsill, right? And you don't have any control over that pigeon, that when that pigeon will come or when that sparrow will come. And yet sometimes we are visited by these birds, right? And the birds are able to perch precisely because we have made that windowsill, right? So it's not only that the human is using nature for their uh, life, but sometimes whatever we make, the non-human also comes and utilizes it, even though it is not in the way that we have imagined or we had thought of. And here is the point, that how to understand that when such visits will happen. Can we understand when such visits will happen? Uh, Maybe if you put a bait outside, like if you put water bowls during summer, then of course there will be greater chance of birds visiting the window. Uh, and even if you don't put, sometimes it just happens, right? So there is this unpredictability to the non-human. And this unpredictability is manifest across, like you will see it everywhere. The way earthquakes happen, the way floods happen, the way weather changes. The meteorological department will tell you that it is going to rain tomorrow, and somehow it won't rain tomorrow. It doesn't. And sometimes they say that it's going to be a clear sky, and then suddenly the rains arrive, right? So there is that kind of unpredictability. Now, what we take from here is not to look at the non-human world outside as an object. Uh, so it's not a configuration of subject-object relationship. It's a rather a configuration of an inter-subject relationship. So if you look at other elements outside of humans as subject, then we will arrive at something called the subject-subject configuration, right? And here, by according subjectivity to the non-human, what is also going to happen is that you will not think of the non-human as a project. You will think of the non-human as perhaps a frustrating friend, but a friend nonetheless. I'm not going as far as to say that it has personhood, but to think of hills, rivers, birds, trees, all of these elements uh, in their own agentive space, or in their own agentive state, that these things also have some sort of agency. They do not exist merely for us, right? So if we think of subject object orientation, then the non-human will exist for us, because then they will become objects for our use. But if we think of the human non-human as subject subject, existing in a subject subject relationship, then we will have to make peace with their quirks, with their unpredictability, or their predictive nature, or predictable nature, right? There are certain things that we know, that after summer it will rain, because the monsoon will come, and after monsoon there will be autumn, after autumn there will be winter, after winter spring, and then back to summer, right? So there is some cycle involved, which we are familiar with. And yet within this cycle, the larger cycle, there is plenty of scope for disruption, right? Now, when I was writing Tales, Tales was written over a period of written over a period of 1 year, but the material that made the book, the material was collected, if I can use that word, collected over, I think, around 7-8 years of time. And why it took time is because I was interested in noticing patterns. So, for example, when someone goes to a waterfall, and the book is filled and full with waterfalls. So when someone goes to a waterfall, uh, what is the purpose behind that travel? Or when you travel to a place, forget about waterfalls, any place, is it to tick a checklist that, okay, hamara Ladakh ho gaya, and now after that I'm going to Arunachal, and after that I'm going to Gokarna, and so on and so forth. So you can call yourself a traveler, and still you would have traveled very superficially. That someone told, or I saw on Instagram reels that this valley in Kashmir is very photogenic. So I'll go to this valley, and then I'll put that okay, I've been to Kashmir, and one object tick from the list, and then I'll go to another place. So you can travel widely, of course, but what the book tries to do is travel deeply. And there is a difference between wide and deep travel. When you are traveling deeply, what you want to do is that you want to establish some connections. And these are largely emotional connections, but still it's up to us that how those connections are configured. If someone goes to a waterfall, like Mihir in the book goes to multiple waterfalls, uh, they also it's one thing that if they go in the monsoon when the water levels will be very high, but then what I would try to suggest is that go also during the summer, go also during winter, go also during autumn, spring, all these seasons, so that the character of the waterfall will come across to you, will be made visible to you. Of course, all waterfalls are running in monsoon, and that's a given. But what happens when the water recedes? When the water recedes, you are able to see the rocks, right? And when you are able to see the rocks, you're also able to notice the patterns of the rocks, that how those rocks are formed. Where, for example, the last part of the waterfall to get dry, right? Uh, is actually the river's intended course, because that's where the river is most powerful. And the first part where the waterfall dries is largely is largely a function of the flood that happens during monsoon. uh, there is also that when you want to see a waterfall, I would suggest that don't go in the monsoon when the water is muddy and yellow, and there's just noise all around. But the best time would be to go in October or November when the sediments have settled. Uh, you can also see the rocks, you can also see the water would be clearer, and it is going to give you a new sight. Similarly, if you go in spring, that way you will see that how water endures through the rising heat, and where it is actually cornering itself in order to gain as much flow that it can. And during summer, it all goes quiet. In Chotanagpur Plateau, where I live in Jharkhand, waterfalls nearly go dry during summers, almost all, save for a handful. And when they go dry during summers, that dry waterfall becomes a wonderful site for rock climbing, and to engage in other activities which you otherwise wouldn't, right? So it is with this deep travel or this very intimate connection which you build with a place, that you are also able to yank that place out of that objecthood and pull it more towards the subjecthood. Then you will be able to see that how a waterfall functions, that what is the nature of that waterfall. Similarly with rivers, similarly with hills, similarly with forests. There is a chapter in the book titled Forest, and it begins with that dreamscape sort of a visual, that what happens during February here is that there is this gentle breeze flowing across the forest, and the leaves, they keep on dropping, and in a very languid manner they drop, and by the time they touch the ground, some other leaf has also broken free, and now that leaf is flowing in the air, right? And if you combine the same event with multiple trees, so there is always this visual of just leaves dropping, 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 right? So when it comes to one particular tree, or when it comes to a collection of trees as they appear in a forest, uh, this site, this site is available to you only during February, March. And when all the leaves have dropped, and when April begins, and then the forest goes very dry, and then the branches become bare, and then the rains come, and then the entire forest is green. There's a uniformity to the color scape. And then the autumn comes, and then the leaves begin to age, and some acquire yellow color, some acquire brownish color, some remain green. So the character of the forest, uh, how it changes colors, how it changes appearance, that also you can that also you can experience only when you travel deeply, only when you give enough time to understand what is outside of you, what is not you, right? So there is one thing to say that, okay, I went to Kanha and I did safari and I saw tigers, and the guides will make sure that you see tigers. But what if you went to a not so touristy forest, where the chances of seeing a wild animal or any animal is not already manipulated, where it is just you and depending on their whims, they will show themselves to you, or maybe they won't. I remember this one time I took my father to the wildlife sanctuary here in Hazaribagh, and he was thoroughly disappointed because he didn't see anything, and he was complaining कि कितना खराब जंगल है, यहाँ कुछ नहीं है, so there's nothing here, nothing to see. Uh, and then after I dropped him back home, and then I went to the same forest again, and there I saw that spotted deer, a group of spotted deer, which didn't arrive the day before. So it is by understanding that they are not at your service. It is through also understanding that you perhaps cannot control the non-human. You can approximate. An approximation, I think, is that methodology which I'm trying to arrive here. That there cannot be a guarantee that the reason that you step outside of your house will be met, will be fulfilled. Uh, you might see something else. You might get some other experience which was not on your list. And it is important to recognize those events as experiences, right? So just because I did not see a wild animal and I ended up seeing a stream, it does not mean that the stream itself is not an event or an experience, right? It is by constantly engaging in that perception training, that where are you looking and what are you looking for, and in case it does not appear, then what are the other things or other sights or other smells that are available to you, and how do you apprehend those things, how do you make sense of those things, right? So when we talk of place and nature writing, uh, these are two distinct terms, right? A place is one term, nature is one term. They have their own connotations, cultural, linguistic, all kinds of connotations. But still, uh, because they have different connotations, it is also important for us to understand them for what they mean. A place can stand in for multiple values. So there could be a larger structural value, which will say that, okay, Chota Nagpur is a plateau. And then there could be smaller tactical values, which we as individuals will ascribe to that place. So yes, it is a plateau, but how does that plateau behave? Is it uniformly flat at the top, or are there undulations on the top as well? Uh, because usually we think of plateau as ki yahan se it starts and then it goes flat on the top and then it drops. But when we are in a plateau, we also understand that it's not so neat. Even on the top, there can be, valleys, there can be fissures, there can be breaks in the formation of the land. Similarly, when someone says waterfall, it's water falling, right? That's simply a waterfall. But then waterfalls could be of multiple types. There could be a sheer waterfall which falls like uh, sheer into the pit below. It could be staggered. It could be a smaller waterfall. It might mean it might come to stand as a waterfall for you, and yet other people might not look at the same place as a waterfall. They might say that no, it's too small for a waterfall, and you can go on to defend that no, I still consider it a waterfall, right? So between the larger cultural ideas that we have of places, it is through our uh, uh, creative imagination, it is through our engagement with those places that we also build something that we also build personalized connection through our tact. That where are we going? Someone says that do not go to this place in this season because यहाँ पर कुछ नहीं होगा. So for example, I might advise that someone who wants to see waterfalls, I might say that no, don't visit during summers because you won't see water. But it is up to them who can immediately counter that no, I want to see a waterfall without water, right? And I could ask why, and they could say ki, no, I want to see it bare. I want to see it naked, that how it looks before it is inundated with water. So I want to look at the character. It is very difficult for the human to build character uh, or to ascribe character to something which is not human. Uh, First, because of the unpredictability which we talked about with that bird, for example. And still, it does not stop us. It does not stop us to be invested in them. There will be multiple stories which you might have read, and we continue to read, that how one person becomes sentimental for a dog or a cat. And to take the example of the cat doesn't care. I mean, you can run around the cat, that give me affection, give me love, look at me, and the cat simply won't care. The cat will follow its own timeline. It will follow its own whims. uh, at the most unexpected time when you would be working, then the cat will come, and then the cat will say, now pet me. And at that time there will be a conflict that no, but I have to write this assignment, I have to submit this project, I can't pet you, and that is the time that the cat will demand, right? Similarly, dogs might be different. Dogs could be they love to get pet anytime that you want them to. Some elephants, if you are a mahout, if you are familiar with them, then the elephants will let you pet them, but otherwise they will trample on you and you'll be dead. So that's why people say that do not go near wild animals, because you can't predict their nature. But how to reconcile this unpredictability with our own selves? The first idea is to think of ourselves also as unpredictable beings. That human beings are also not, they don't follow a pattern. we might say that, okay, I do not like yogurt, and I might go someplace and they serve me yogurt, and which I might well enjoy that. And then I realized, no, I do actually like yogurt. Uh, for the longest time, I used to say that I don't like eggplant. And then one day my mother made eggplant in a certain way, and then I asked her, "Ki, what is this?" And she said, "It's eggplant." And after like 23 years of convincing myself that I don't like eggplant, in the 24th year, I started liking eggplant, but made in that way. So humans are also not predictable creatures. So it is to bring these two unpredictable things into a kind of harmony. And I think that is the entire project of nature writing, and writing which delves into places, also natural places. Now, we started thinking along the lines of how this room uh, is 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 a very personal thing for us. But as long as and what I'm trying to actually suggest here is that despite uh, there being around 20 of you in that lecture hall that I see, uh, that hall itself will hold very different meaning to all of you present there. For example, Joya is the instructor. So for her, the hall is a place of work. Uh, she also commands some authority in the hall, right? For students, some of you might be in the first year, some of you might be in the second year, some of you might be in the third year. Some of you have come to this hall for the first time or second time, third time. Some of you have basically spent more time in the hall. Uh, the chairs that you have chosen to sit, even that tells something about you. That why are some people preferring to be at the front, and why are some people preferring to be
Now they've
in the
been
back?
forced to sit in front.
Of course. It's given by the authoritative figure, right? So this room is configured in certain spatial way, right? Spatial from space, right? So the person who is sitting at the back, they have their eyes have to wade through heads in order to see me, right? And the person who is in the front, they are able to see me all right. So the sights are going to be different from the different people in that room. And when you are made to recount that what did you do in these 1.5 hours, not even to say that what did you learn, that will come later, uh, but just what did you make of these 1.5 hours in this particular room. When your friends ask you this question, I'm sure that there might be some similarities, but there will also be very major differences. Some will say, Ki, no, I attended the lecture because attendance. And someone will say that I attended the lecture because I really wanted to, so I enjoyed the lecture. Someone will say that, no, I just attended the lecture because the words nature and place sounded nice. So I was there on an experimental basis. Inside this room with 4 walls, uh, it has already become multiple spaces for multiple people. I am not present in that room, and still for the length of the time that I am going to speak, you hear me, right? You hear some I'm present not physically, but in a very different way, right? You might think that there's a voice coming out from nowhere. If I turn off my video, then it would be just a voice speaking from the dark, and still I am there with you. So if someone asks me that, what did it feel like to be in Hazaribagh and still be occupying that room through your voice and through your face, right? It's kind of a interesting and also a troubling question, uh, because to be present in 2 spaces simultaneously, I am experiencing the slight, uh, the winter isn't over yet, so there's still a slight nip in the air in Hazaribagh, and I see none of you are wearing jackets, so it's pretty much hot there, and yet I am in that hot space, and I'm also here. right? So there is some sort of simultaneity which is happening to inhabit these multiple spaces. And this is where space differs from place. That space is an experiential construction. It's also abstract. Place can be pinned down to a coordinate that, okay, this building, this room, this lecture hall, from this time to this time. But when you remember, or when you try, and when you go to your rooms, when you go to your homes, and when someone asks that, okay, so how did it go, you will come back to this room in memory, right? And this room will still exist as a space, right? So the point that I'm trying to make is, it is up to us that how we experience a place and how we write those experiences down in form of a diary entry, in form of a paragraph, or even in form of a dry observational piece. That, okay, there were 10 people here, the walls were blue, something like this. We started from thinking about the scale, the civilization, and here nature or wilderness. Let's call it wilderness. And somehow to combine these two, or to look for wilderness or natural in civilized places, or to look for civilization in natural places or wild places. We tend to think that tiger reserves, or national parks, or wildlife sanctuaries, these are wild places, right? But if you look very closely, even these are not wild. They are very nicely maintained. They are very nicely touched. These are not untouched places, because maintaining these places is the forest department. And you have roads that take you inside. They offer you certain sites and certain experiences, and there are areas which are off limit to regular public, which can be accessed only by the forest staff. So the idea that there is something man-made and there is something purely natural, that idea perhaps does not exist in the present time. So someplace as foreboding as national parks and tiger reserves, right? They can still be human constructions. They can still be nicely man-made. It's just that on the scale, the intervention of the man would be somewhat minimal. And here in the city, the intervention of the man would be somewhat large, right? So in that chapter, the forest chapter only, there is an example of waterfall and a stone quarry existing simultaneously. That there is a stone chip mining site which doubles up as a waterfall during monsoon, and then in the summer it goes back to becoming a mine, right? These are two very disparate theoretical concepts. Theoretical, I'm using this word in conceptual concepts. But in praxis, in reality, these two can cohabit. So to think that a mine can also set the stage for a waterfall to occur, that is one thing. And the mine exists precisely because of the rocks which the waterfall earlier had. So it's the coexistence of these two theoretically different spaces. One is industrial and the other is natural, right? And we are made to conditioned to believe that industrial cannot be natural and natural cannot be industrial. But industries also, like, what is being mined? It's the stones, and stones are natural elements, right? So this distinction then perhaps would not hold as we enter, or as we see things around us in the 21st century. These two concepts have become more porous, malleable, right? One can easily be found in the other, and the other can be found in the one before. Similarly, we tend to think that cities are highly civilizational spaces, and it does not have any space for nature. And yet it is not true. You can still see amaltas trees in the summer blooming on pavements. You can still find you can still find birds occupying the crowns of the trees. There was very recently my friend Neha Sinha. She wrote a paper and she was studying the behavior of the birds on just one road alone, Africa Avenue, which is in Delhi. On that avenue alone, she found she recorded the behavior of I'm forgetting the species of the bird, but one bird, and she did it over time. So she also went deep. She also traveled deep to the same place, and then it she found out something, and she wrote something which wasn't known to people before. Uh, what I'm trying to say is that these neat ideas, these neat binaries that we tend to create, these are ideological binaries. They perhaps don't uh, exist in such a straitjacket manner. They cannot be pigeonholed. That okay, nature you stop here, and okay, city you begin here, and nature you do not have any place in the city, and city you do not have any place in nature. Uh, or if we take out the word city, civilization. So civilization, you do not have a place in wilderness. This does not happen now. Wilderness also has a way of rewilding places. If you might have made a mansion 100 years ago, and when that mansion goes out of use, no one stays there except for ghosts or like other non-human elements. Then you see that nature also rewilds that ruin, right? Ruins are that perfect example of how very slowly and steadily you see that undergrowth starts to appear. You see that creepers start to occupy the bricks. People trees can extend their roots well into the brick walls. So these are very dynamic interactions that man and nature have with each other. And what I'm trying to highlight is that neither is absent from the other. So perhaps to think that nature writing is separate from what other writings are, we need to look at that also. Of course, publishers, they create genres in order to slot the books. But when I was writing Tales of Hazaribagh, I was not writing, I was not doing nature writing. I did not know that it would be later go on to be called nature writing. I thought that it was a travel memoir. A memoir because it's a recollection of events, and travel because it has some traveling involved. At that time, I wasn't even looking at the question of how I'm writing about nature, or whether I should write it in a certain way. It just happened, and it happened unknown to me. And now I realize it because I had spent time in this plateau over years, just studying, just looking. Even studying would be a wrong word to use, not study, but to just look and to be in the presence of something else. And and there is a line which comes to my mind. It's by Scottish writer Nan Shepherd, and this is something that I remember when I read her book The Living Mountain. And she says that I go to visit this hill just as a friend goes to visit some other friend, right? You may go to a friend's place and that friend might be feeling low, and you may go to a friend's place and say that okay, chalo, let's watch a movie, and that friend might say that oh no, I am not in the mood for a movie, and then your plans change, right, in that space of the friend's home. You don't say to that friend, no, but I wanted to watch a movie, so let's watch a movie, right? You can say that to a servant, right, to an object. You cannot say that to a subject. If some And it is to reconcile one subject with the other subject, right? So if you care about your friend, if you call someone your friend, then you will also take their feelings into consideration. You will also take their behavior, their quirks into consideration. That okay, that's how they are, right? Sometimes I have a senior, and let's call her R, and I met her in college, and people used to be astounded by her, that how can she say something like this? How can she be such so frank with her words, and all of those things? And then I also used to feel that she does whatever she wants to do. And then someone told me ki Mihir, R is like that. If you want to be her friend, you have to accept her for who she is, right? And I think that when it comes to uh, at least approximating that relationship between us and the world outside, between the human and the non-human, we have to take into this very thought that they are like that. We don't have control over them. The best we can do is uh, try to give them space, try to see how they behave, try to uh, understand their qualities, their quirks, their failings, their if their strengths, just like we have. Now, all of this, and understandably, all of this is coming from the perception of human, right? So it is still an anthropocentric thought to go and to try to see that if there is a pattern, to try and see if there is some sort of character. Now, this has limitation. What if what if the hill is not there to give you some wisdom? What if the hill is just there? Sometimes the hill is just a hill. Uh, if, if someone goes to a hill and thinks that, okay, if I look at the hill for 15 minutes, I will find truths about humanity, and I will find, in that romantic mode, that I will suddenly, it will give me wisdom, and I will go and I will sit quietly by the river, and suddenly some genius idea will come to my head, or the river will teach me something, that how to keep flowing in the face of adversity. But rivers don't always flow, right? Rivers go dry also. Right? So, and trees are always not so shady. They don't always provide shade. Some trees are just tall, so they are not shade giving trees. Similarly, you might think of a volcano, which is still a very natural sight. And you say, and in poetry, you can write that I feel the energy of lava bubbling inside of me. But if you were to go to the actual volcano, it can pretty much kill you, right? So if you go to a volcano thinking that I'll go and return with these great insights, you will return if you can, without dying. And sometimes you can return without gathering anything, right? So here is the limitation of the human perception, that sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes it doesn't happen in a way that, okay, today today no, ab to raat ho gayi, but tomorrow I will wake up at 5:30 and I will go to a forest and I will record sounds of birds. I mean, what if birds have gone to some other forest or some other area, right? Or you may think that, okay, tomorrow I'll go and sit by a stream and listen to its gentle murmur, and write poems. And maybe you will hear the murmur, and yet nothing will come to your mind. Uh, so perhaps the only experience that you could have is to hear that murmur, right? And that is fine. That is what I'm trying to say. That even that is fine. We don't have to find meanings or anything wise in these stray occurrences. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it does not, right? It is to appreciate the non-human when it does not give you anything, right? We can appreciate people, we can appreciate plenty of things because it gives us something in return. But what if something doesn't give you anything? Does it mean that your connection is void? Does it mean that it is of no use? Sometimes being useless is actually the best use that one can have. And in the book also, I think there is it happens in chapter 2, where there is a line that sometimes a hill is just a hill. It is not a dining table. It is not a place jahan par you go to have a picnic. It is simply a hill, and sometimes we climb that hill, and sometimes we just watch that hill. So now coming to the thoda sa workshop part, that how to think about these matters in creative terms, that when we come to write, and when we come to write something like nature writing or something like place writing, of course your mind is already oriented just by the term nature and place writing, so you will look for uh, specific specific things which will connect with the subject. But let me take you back uh, to to one question that I have noted for today's session. All of us, I think, we look at Instagram, we look at websites, social media, and I think all of us have this fantasy or imagination or idea of a future, desire, dream, that I will live by a beach someday, or I will live in the hills someday, or I will live somewhere. And this desire is there because even though we might be content with wherever we are presently, but that there is some sort of lack which we think that it will be fulfilled once we start living there, right? So your first exercise, and you don't have to write a paragraph, you can write bullet points also. Your first exercise is that imagine that you are given that chance, that a genie comes to you and says that, okay, whichever place you want to live in, right? You go ahead and spend 1 year. What do you think your life would be in that place? Think of your education, think of your position right now, that I know how to speak in English. I can, maybe some of you can sing, some of you can dance, some of you can teach certain things. Some of you might not even need to teach things, or might not even need to do things. The genie has given you all the money, right? That just go and live. So in maybe write a paragraph, or just write 5 points, that what do you think your life would be if you were to live in a geography of your preference for a year? What are you going to do for that one year period? Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 to 10 minutes while you start writing.
Can you repeat the prompt again, Mihir? And can you repeat the prompt once more for us?
Yes.
And a little louder. Your voice is slightly faint.
Okay. Now I'll just put my mic here.
Yeah.
So the question is very simple. You are given a chance to live at a geography of your preference. It could be hills, it could be beaches, anything that you like. It has to be something different from where you are presently, right? Anything that appeals to you. You are given the chance to live there for 1 year. Think about seasons, right? What are you going to do? What do you think your life is going to be in that 1 year? You can give me bullet points, or you can write a paragraph if you want to. I'll give you 10 minutes to do it. So it's 7:55. So I'll ring the bell at 8:05. All right. Okay. So you can stop writing, and I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. Okay, that's the last thing that even I, as a student, uh, would like to experience. So not putting anyone on the spot here, but the idea is that, okay, you have written about your desires, that what that life would look like if you were given a chance to spend 1 year at your preferred location, natural location. Now, what is also inbuilt into this very innocent question uh, is something that is invisible, and the invisible is you. That uh, so the visible subject is outside, that you're going to occupy that visible subject. The invisible subject is you. That uh, what are you going to do? uh, Madhumita says that okay, there's going to be a very nice calm environment with sea breeze, lots of blue, lots of sun, uh, and that is fine. I think that's the idea behind it. But how is that going to impact you? I mean, what I'm trying to ask is that a beach also is not a uniform geography. You might want to occupy a space or a place overlooking the beach, which is situated on a cliff. You might want to live right on the beach, right? You might want to have some sort of a walking trail. So your house could be elsewhere, and then you walk for 15 minutes to the beach or 5 minutes to the beach. In the beach, you might want to engage in some activities, which I think since we are imagining we can engage in any which way. I'm very scared of all those water sports, but yes, in imagination I'm a pro, right? So I'm doing all those paragliding and diving and everything. But uh, there's a way in which these landscapes, some of you might have written about mountains, that I'm going to go and live in the mountains. I might start a farm there and raise chickens. And some of you might want to live in an orchard with mango trees. It is the reason that we have picked these places, and the reason that we have picked some activities that we are going to do, it tells us about ourselves foremost. And this was the hidden question in what came to you as a fantasy question. The hidden question is to look at ourselves, that why have we made the choice to occupy that place. There is one thing to say that no, I'm a beach person or I'm a mountain person, but why are you a mountain? Is there a history to that? What was the first experience of mountain? Why are mountains so dear? Why is a plateau so dear to me? Why are beaches so dear, or a river is so dear, right? Does it have to do anything with spending time during childhood? Does it have to do anything with earning that first money and going to a hill station? Does it have to do with making some very specific memory at a beach? Or does it have to do with something just impulsive, that one day I decided to go to Ratnagiri and it was the best trip of my life, and now I want to relive that experience? Or it could be something completely irrational. You could say that I am a beach person because I am. I can't explain you why. I just feel very drawn to a beach. And still I would prod you to articulate that irrationality, that why, right? To write about nature and place, and also about ourselves, right? So it's not merely that we are documenting some places, or this is a fort, or this is a waterfall, or this is a river, but the very selection that we make, that this is worthy of being written about and this is not worthy of being written about, right? One of the criticisms that the book gets is that it doesn't have people. So you talk about Hazaribagh, but there are no Hazaribagh ki narrow lanes and those the flavors of whatever local dishes being made in the streets. And yeah, I think that's for someone else to write about. That's not for me. And here we come to understand that who we are. That if I want to raise chicken in a farm in the mountains, and mountains are again different. So Shivaliks would be different, Nilgiris would be different. You might want to raise chicken in Ladakh, and good luck. And you might want to raise chicken in Rishikesh. Both of them are mountainous regions. So it also depends that which place are you choosing to stay. Do you want perennial cold, or do you want some bit of sunshine? Do you want always it has to be snow 24/7, 365, or does it have to give you some other glimpses also? The reason you have chosen these places to write about, and the reason I wrote about Plateau, is because we connect on some very basic level, and what we choose to write about tells us about ourselves. Now, this was a simple exercise, and I would look forward to see that what you have written. If you would like to share it with me, one paragraph perhaps. You might have bullet points. You could write it in a paragraph or two, and I would be happy to read it. But the larger question that we are trying to address here is that even while writing about places, it is never detached from us. So we somehow make those places subjective, and by making them subjective, we create spaces out of that particular geography or a place or a city, anything, right? So I could give you another exercise. I won't, but in a manner of speaking, I can give you another exercise that write a paragraph about Krea University campus. And yes, there will be some formulaic descriptions that, okay, when we enter, we see this lawn or something like this, because campuses are constructed in pretty much set patterns. So there would be some formulaic descriptions.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
So the exercise that they do, at least the students in the environmental communication class, we're trying to work on it, cajoled, to either, we're going to Pulikat on Saturday. So they're going to look at, and I told you that they were, they would spend an entire morning and afternoon there, and into one of the islands, Irukam. But their intermediate assignment is actually to write something like a natural history of the Krea perimeter. So it's a very interesting landscape. We do have a very well manicured gardens and all that, but we also have something that kind of lies beyond the pale and has been left to sort of look like untouched, and they're supposed to sort of write about it. So if you want to sort of, and they've begun the first sort of attempt to, write descriptive, but it's tough. We're all sort of struggling with it. So if you want to sort of give some sort of indications on how your process, because you do that. There's a subjective journey, but you're also reading a lot of. It's very evident. You've read a lot of history. You know what your stuff. You can talk about the different kinds of forests. I feel like the objective is where. What is where we're struggling. We don't know the names of the trees. We don't know what birds are here.
Yeah. So when it comes to arboreal and aerial life, even I am not an expert. So what I do is that I make my own names. So,
okay. So that maybe could be one tactic.
Yeah. So
strategy.
you might not know the correct name or scientific name, or you might not be a avifauna biologist, but it should not stop you from giving them your own names, right? Okay, this is bird X, and I see this bird X visit, or I saw X 3 times a day. Or even if you hear a sound, it's a Y sound. So I heard Y 5 times a day. The next day, Y was missing, right? So we can come to specifics or that precision later, and that can always be looked up on the internet, or you can send a photo to some expert and they will identify that bird or tree for you. But yes, one way is to go like this. You give your provisional names, whatever you like. You can call some tree Mark, you can call the other tree Sheetal or something like that. I mean, it's fine. But since you are writing about the landscape of Krea itself, What I do in IIT, and Joya knows this, is that I take photos of trees, and I take photos of trees against very, the human constructions. So there is the Department of Transport Studies, which tells you how to drive safely or teaches road construction. And outside there might be might be a tree. I don't know which tree that is, so I call it XYZ, something like that. Sometimes I find a semel tree. So semel tree, I know the name, I know the flower, and right outside or right next to the semel tree would be a hostel, right? So I would try to put these two together. Of course, my objective is to depict this kind of coexistence, which of course is also planned. So there are gardeners involved who create this site for us. But just like you said, Joya, that there is also a space which has been left to grow on its own. There are very few such spaces in IIT campus, which is so neatly administered. So the beauty is very tight. And yet in JNU, right across the road, JNU can offer that wilderness.
Yeah.
And so whenever I feel like I have to go and be in the wild, I think JNU is the option. And when I feel that I have to
the wild, there are also questions in the audience, Mihir. So when you're ready,
so I'll just
when you're
give
ready.
you 2-3 points and then I'll finish. And when you have to be in the garden, so wild and the garden are two very different spaces. So if you have to be in the garden, then perhaps IIT Delhi is the place to be. Make repeated visits. That's what I'm trying to tell you. That kind of earmark a week for that. And just like gym trainers make your program, that today is the upper body, lower body, and legs, and all of these things. So you can say that Monday is morning, Tuesday I'll go in the afternoon, Wednesday I'll go in the evening, and then Thursday morning, Friday afternoon, Saturday evening, right? And try to make some observations that how that place behaves in the morning, how that place behaves in the afternoon, and behave also in the sense that how much heat is impacting you on your shoulder. Do you feel more sweaty? Is humidity increasing? Something like that, right? What kinds of are people visiting? Are more people visiting in the evening? Are more people visiting in the morning or in the afternoon? When is it deserted? So think along these lines. Why you are doing this? This idea, this question that what are these observations going to create ultimately? It's okay if you don't have that idea yet, but we can start from observing, and sometimes narrative comes later once you have the material. Sometimes, of course, you know that what you're looking for, so you go looking for that. But if we have learned anything from this lecture, is that there is the element of unpredictability, and that itself could threaten your narrative if you go with a set agenda. So try to build your agenda as you collect data, right? As you observe, as you make your points, as you make your notes, right? And yeah, that's pretty much it. And now we can take questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, I really enjoyed your talk, especially like the writing exercise and mentioning nature. I found myself struggling to remember how hills look in March, because there's a visual in my head with barren twigs, and then I think of vibrant leaves, and then I'm like, that's monsoon. So it's very interesting to think of places like that. One of the questions I had, and which I personally am struggling with while doing this form of writing, is there a balance of the personal that we bring in? Because we read your writing and it's very personal, but at the same time, it's a particular kind of personal. So, and you did mention that you never really wrote with the idea of that you're doing place or nature writing. So then how do we sort of navigate this process of how much we include ourselves, what sort of inclusion we do with ourselves. And you also mentioned at one point in the lecture, you said, Mihir in the book thought this. So I was wondering if you created a different personality for yourself in the book, which is not something you are, or that something came along the way. So, yeah.
Mihir in the book is the Mihir who wrote the book during 2019 to 20. And of course, Mihir has now evolved. So he has also changed. The Mihir who is talking to you is a bit different from Mihir in the book. This is not to say that Mihir in the book is a creation. More than creation, it is. So the bio note tells you that Mihir is a river walker, right? It doesn't say that Mihir is a poet and a writer or a photographer. And this is what Mihir in the book is. So it's not so much a fictional creation, but just kind of distilling an aspect of the author, right? One way is to go about like this, that who is writing? So is a poet writing? Is a writer writing? Is a walker writing? Is an observer writing? Who is writing? And depending on who is writing, you can then decide that how much that person wants to be included in your narrative. How much to include the walker, how much to include the watcher, right? So something like this could be done. Now, because it is a creative writing exercise, it will, and you can write fiction. It's okay. You can completely create a fictional narrative out of Krea University's campus. Then you don't have to include much of your own subjectivity, even though like the characters you create might have some element of you inside them. So then you can shield yourself. Then you can protect the person who is writing. But if you are writing a non-fiction, if you're not fictionalizing, if you're writing your observations, a good thing to do is, and I can't stress enough on this, is to be earnest. So when something does not yield a desired outcome or a result, you can still mention that. In tales, there are many times it happens that Mihir in the book goes to locate a river or a waterfall or a hill, and there's disappointment because it's not there, or it turns out to be something fictional, mythical. Especially in chapter 5th, it happens that people say that Nisan Lagwa is a waterfall, turns out that it's a hill. And the waterfall that Mihir has in mind, it turns out to be a rather riverine stretch, a very rocky stretch. It can't be particularly called a waterfall, and still water is falling. So it's like a rapid. So even in the moment of no discovery, articulate that frustration, because it comes back to you, that why did you have that expectation in the first place? It's always a tussle, when I say when you enter into this inter-subject writing where nature is not an object, then you are also entering into this kind of a tussle where you can be charmed by the nature, you can be made pathetic by nature, you can fail there, and yet you have to acknowledge that failure, right? One final thing is that when the epilogue of the book, that epilogue is an editorial suggestion. So when I submitted the manuscript, there was no epilogue. So it was my editor who insisted on the epilogue, that, and I can see the reason why. And he said that, Mihir, there are some loose strands which have not been resolved. For example, in chapter 1, you begin with mental health. So what happened to that Mihir who left Delhi? So did something happen there? So you have to write this in the epilogue. And there were other loose ends also. Now I could have left these aside. I could have said, I don't want to do this. But for the sake of narrative, it was required. So sometimes we are also bound by the form that we are taking. So if it is a narrative nonfiction, then there has to be some beginning, middle, and end. So when I said that, don't worry about narrative so much while you are making your observations. I'm saying this from my example, that the narrative can come later. You can still devise a story later, and that story could be very earnest and heartfelt and personal. But it should not stop you from engaging with nature in the first place.
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I love the talk and I also love the 2 chapters that I read. So I had a question about like on the lines of like subjectivity of the non-human. So like there are a lot of like one of the most entertaining parts in these chapters for me were the narratorial interruptions. Like you talk about the local legends or like something like a personal anecdote about the rickshaw story at night, and through that you take us along all 3 lakes to the colony, or like the case of the wildlife sanctuary, or like even metaphorical sort of impressions about like the idea of Plaque's mirror of the lake. As a literature student, I easily could recognize that. So how do you think these sort of like your personal interruptions or like human perceptions as an observer contribute to sort of this inter-subject? Like you mentioned that there's a limitation to the human perception. You can't be at the risk of falling to cliches like that volcano example that you mentioned. But how does those, talking about local legends or talking it in some sort of, it's not completely romanticizing, but it's poetical, contributes to the idea of inter-subject relationship? And my second question is this, like you talked about how it's very difficult for us humans when we are engaging in writing about nature and place to give character to non-humans because they are so unpredictable. But like, in the genres of say folk tales or fables, animals, nature, trees are often personified. Even when you like gaze at the clouds, you sort of think of it as a shape, right? So that sort of a thing I could find in these books, but like in ecological writing, I have not read a lot. But I often feel like in nonfiction, that sort of an element is missing. So how do you think like that? How do you think we can rethink sort of this genre if we sort of compare it to say personification of like lakes in the story, or personification that we see in fables and like childhood stories that we read in general? Yeah.
Yes. So you have 2 questions. First, how to escape romanticization, and second, how to escape anthropomorphization. Yeah, these are 2 things. So how to escape romanticization? How to escape romanticization is to go within. You will always have certain cultural vocabulary with you. So when someone says in the lap of nature, it's the speech genre which is waiting to erupt out of our mouths. Like the blissful solitude, right? These are phrases which we have grown up with. Sometimes it's not even true. Sometimes like you can go to a natural place and you can still not feel in the lap of nature. So just last bit of words of advice. The first was romanticization. So you have to be specific. You have to think about how it is impacting you, right? The more you adopt this critical lens, the more you'll be able to evade that tendency. The free flowing river and the solitude, the bliss of the forest. uh, Only write bliss of the forest if you have experienced bliss of the forest. That's what I'm trying to say. And if you have experienced something else which goes against what you have read so far, please go ahead and write it, because that is only going to contribute some freshness to something which might have gone trite.
Maybe this is actually helpful. So why we think that it's, why I was saying cliche romance and all, because it reads cliche. So if it's not reading cliche, that means it's not been, I get the sense as a reader that it's not been felt.
Yes.
That's
yes.
why, but one says one sort of attributes it to is subjectivism. That's actually not the case. So that's a helpful corrective to my approach also, which is what I was like. Vidhi was, going down this, Vidhi took the subjective,
The question.
it was a question. So thanks for that. And the other question was, the animal, yeah.
The other question was pathetic fallacy, that how
Yes.
to evade pathetic fallacy sometimes. Sometimes you can't. If you approach something as a friend, then it is only natural that you end up giving some human values to them. But again, to keep that in check, it would be wise to know that I am ascribing those values, right? So fables are different. Fables and parables, they employ animals and trees to a very specific end, because they have to teach us something. When we are doing nature writing, of course, because the human is writing, it's human language. Some of that will come in, some of that will seep in, but try not to. It's a very delicate balance how to do it. Sometimes you can simply make dry observations that yes, the cloud was moving, and sometimes you can actually say that yes, the cloud looked like a hammer or an elephant or something other. Again, it goes back to yourself, that if the cloud looks like an elephant to you, then what is the relevance of that elephant? Why did it appear to you in that way? And if the cloud was simply moving, then what is that movement? How is that movement relevant to you? So just a healthy dose of uh, criticism or critiquing while you are writing creatively, that can be very helpful.
Yeah. Aditi has a question.
Hi. The talk was really interesting, and I also liked the chapters that I read. You mentioned when I think while answering Vidhi's question that you have to look at who is writing, but then what about who is reading? Should we take that into account? Because while I was reading your chapters, I think in the late it was more like like the names of the clouds, which is probably a little more commonplace. But then when it was in the forest, you mentioned escarpment, and I had to Google it to see what it meant. So, and you yourself are not a geographer or a topologist. So then, how do you say these terms? I'll just mention them and leave it. And these terms are something that I want to explain and give an idea to the readers.
Yes, so but that happens later. First draft you write for yourself. I think that's a good way to go about it. That first draft is for you, because it also functions as a way for you to understand. So when you are writing, the reader can come later, and the readers will always come. I never thought that Tales of Hazaribagh would be read by bureaucrats in Jharkhand, and it is like somewhat of an unofficial canon that everyone is reading Tales of Hazaribagh. So sometimes readership can surprise you. You never know that who is going to read and what are they going to, or how they are going to read. The most important part is that it should make sense to you. So maybe you should begin from there. When I was writing about escarpment, even the word escarpment I hadn't heard before when I was doing my BA/MA in literature at Delhi University. It happened after I started reading some gazetteers, the old colonial writings on Hazaribagh, where I found this word escarpment. And then I thought that, okay, if this was familiar to me, then it might be unfamiliar to multiple other people. So what I can do is that I can explain what escarpment is. Sometimes with respect to the clouds, right? When I figure out that there are types of clouds and these clouds have names, cumulonimbus, right? I was very excited. I was very excited to just know that clouds also can have names. And I wanted to share that excitement that, and I also knew that people who are reading, everyone is connected to internet now. So if they want to read up further, they can simply Google. So there is some kind of information sharing, some kind of explication, and then some kind of narrating that is going on. But it is the narration which is important. So explanation can come later in the editing stages also. Narrating to yourself first that what happened, it will help you understand what happened. And then maybe during edits, the book took 2 rounds of edits. So those questions can be addressed later.
Thank you. I just had one last passing question. Since you've been talking about repeated visits and traveling deeply, but the trip we are making to Pulikat is a one-off event. So I was wondering what approach we can take to still be able to engage in a certain manner, but not be able to maybe use the tools you have provided us.
Okay, so what can be done? How long is this visit for?
Starts in the morning, but half a day. Yeah, they'll meet with the fishing communities in the island, and finish off with lunch with them. And then so we'll get there, explore. But yeah, it's basically till about 2:30 in the afternoon.
So you can either spend exploring the entire place, or you could just pick a spot and sit there for half an hour and just notice things that are happening around you. Sites can change when you are changing your position, right? So if you go from X to Y to Z, you will of course have multiple things to work with because you will be seeing multiple. If you choose to stop instead at one place, you might have just one frame, you might have just one visual to see, but you might also experience other things in sensory manner. You might actually try to see that how the soil feels on your hand, what is the texture of that mud or that sand, right? You might try to understand what is the it's a saline lake, right, Joya? Pulikat.
Yes, Rakesh, yeah.
So what might the air feel like? I remember that Half-Blood Prince when Harry goes to that lake and he makes a comment that the air felt very salty. Like it had a peculiar kind of taste to it. So perhaps you could do either of these two things. So you can either travel far and wide and collect as many sites and experiences that you can, or you can choose a spot and just devote yourself to sitting there, noticing as your friends go from one place to the other. And how would that make you feel? How are these tiny specks of colors appearing to you as they flit from one position to the other while you remain stationary? So it also opens up multiple avenues for introspection. So yeah, either of these two things would be.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Mihir, for taking time out. We enjoyed listening to you, and I'll keep you posted on what writing also emerges by the end of our journey.
Yes.
Take care and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, guys. Bye.